Hello all. Time once again to continue with the story. I'm trying to follow a request to put these out more often. I've just been so busy lately, and I will continue to be busy for a good while. So I apologize if I don't upload as frequently as I might like to, and my loyal subscribers might like me to. I'm just certainly not going to be able to record every day or anything like that. But I did have some free time to do this next chapter. This is definitely the longest chapter so far, not to mention just ridiculously, absurdly bloody. But I don't want to run too long or spoil too much right now, so I'll just start and hope everyone keeps enjoying. Thanks. Chapter the 6th. You always remember your first. Vinyl sprinted down the tunnels at full speed, tossing diamond dogs aside like they were nothing. If Appaloosa was destroyed, there had to be some kind of refugee center or survivor outpost somewhere between there and Hoofington. Her plan was to get to the station just outside of Manhattan, to keep away from the Dawn's all-seeing eye, and ride straight to Hoofington. By her calculations, it was at least a half-to-a-day train ride to Hoofington, and from there she'd walk to Appaloosa, or what remained of it. The only thing she could think about while running through the tunnels was Ruby Rhubarb. She didn't know what she'd do if Ruby was... No, she didn't have the time nor mental strength to think about something like that at this time. She stopped at the ladder that led to a manhole above. She climbed up and onto the street and took a look around. Wow, how lucky for her. She was about a yard away from the train station. She trotted over to the station and sat down on a bench awaiting the train. She knew she probably looked like hell right now, but she didn't care. Blood-soaked coat, bullet wound in her leg, and bruises everywhere. She hadn't noticed before, but Trixie had knocked one of the lenses out of her shades. Vinyl removed them and tossed them into the trash beside her. About 20 minutes later, the train to Hoofington pulled into the station. "All aboard?" the conductor shouted. Vinyl made her way inside and immediately went to the bathroom to clean up. This train was high class and had it all. A shower, fresh towels, the works. Vinyl smiled. A hot shower sounded great right now. She turned on the shower and made sure it was extra warm. She let out a yawn and stepped into it. Sticky bits of dried blood and blood-soaked flesh rolled off her coat and down the drain. The steam reached her nose and she took a deep breath. Several minutes later she emerged from the shower and grabbed a towel, drying off. Vinyl felt much better now and left the bathroom in a good mood. She took a seat in the front car and could see 4 stallions pulling the train outside. They were a wonder, they were. She watched them run along for a good 10 minutes, before drifting off into a peaceful sleep. The first real sleep she'd had in a while. A day had passed since Vinyl had boarded the train in Manhattan, and she was nearing Hoofington. It was around 11 in the morning, and Vinyl sat in the same seat she sat in the day before, staring out the window. It kind of bugged her that it was taking so long to get to Hoofington, but this was the fastest way. Though she was a unicorn, she wasn't skilled at magic at all, so teleportation was completely out of the question. Picking things up with magic was about the only thing she knew how to do. She sighed and thought more about Ruby. She hadn't seen her in years, and Vinyl had changed a lot in that amount of time, so it piqued her curiosity as to how much Ruby had changed, if any at all. She looked out the side window again, and a small herd of buffalo were running beside the train. They all had something in their mouth Vinyl couldn't quite make out. "Wait, buffalo," she thought, and then her eyes widened. In each of the buffaloes' mouths was a military-issue Thompson submachine gun. She gasped and threw herself to the floor as the windows shattered, and the sound of gunfire rang in her ears. She could see the stallions pulling the train from a lower window, and one of them had been hit multiple times, and his corpse was being dragged along as dead weight as the other 3 attempted to pick up speed to escape the buffalo. One of the buffalo ran close and opened fire on the other 3. Their blood littered the desert floor and the train tracks. There was a loud screeching noise, and the train began to tip over as the last living stallion took a hit to the leg and veered off to the right, crashing the train through the nearby train station and flipping all the train cars onto their side, a few of them skittering off into the distance. Vinyl was knocked out as one of the seats unbolted from the floor, which was now the wall, and hit her in the head. Vinyl awoke groggily to the sound of shouting and gunfire. She got herself up to her feet and checked to make sure she was okay. A few minor lacerations from shattered glass, her ear was a little bloody, and she had lost a tooth. Other than that and her existing bullet wound, she was fine. Vinyl kicked out a window and ventured outside. A few of the torn-up corpses of the train pullers were lying around, and a bunch of buzzards circled above. It looked like her car had been flung nearly 100 yards from the crash site. She could barely make out Hoofington in the distance, and she wasn't too thrilled to see the herd of buffalo heading towards it. She stumbled out onto the desert, making her way towards Hoofington slowly. About halfway there, she could make out a form lying in the sand, and she picked up her speed. Vinyl was surprised to see Mully lying in the middle of the desert, bleeding to death. "Mully!" Vinyl yelled, shaking her shoulder. Mully's eyes opened slowly. "Oh, thank God you're here," she mumbled wearily. "What the hell are you doing out here?" Vinyl said. "Recon. We had some news of something big happening in Appaloosa," Mully said, slowly climbing to her feet. "I'm so glad to see you, Vinyl," she said. There were 3 bullet holes in Mully's side. "I was just heading back to Hoofington to warn them that Appaloosa had been destroyed." Mully trailed off. Vinyl was staring at the blood seeping out of her wounds, and she looked back at the corpses of the train pullers. Something in her chest jumped, and she began to long for a reason to kill Mully on the spot. "So I need to get to Manhattan ASAP, but I'm gonna need a little help," the mayor said, smiling. Vinyl looked Mully in the eye. "No," she said coldly. "What?" Mully gasped, shocked. "No. You expect me to be all nice and everything? You avoided me at the agency like I didn't even exist," Vinyl said, getting angry. "Vinyl, I was busy. I had—" "You abandoned me! You abandoned Skolder! And now he's dead!" Vinyl barked, knocking Mully to the floor. Mully looked up at Vinyl with wide eyes. "Skolder is dead?" she said, beginning to cry. Vinyl grinned devilishly. "Oh yes, Mully. He's very dead. Very, very dead. And I did it. I did it, Mully! I killed him!" she screamed, stomping on Mully's chest. You? Why would you?" Mully stuttered, grunting in pain. "Because I fucking wanted to, Mully!" Vinyl spat, swiping Mully's M1911 from its holster and strapping on Mully's Fayed. "And now, I'm gonna kill you," Vinyl said, cocking the pistol and pointing the barrel at Mully's head. "You're funny, Vinyl. Good one," Mully said, laughing nervously. "Who said it was a joke?" Vinyl said, pulling the trigger. 645 ACP rounds burrowed into Mully's skull, sending bits of gray matter across the desert floor. A wave of pleasure crawled up Vinyl's spine, and she turned away from the corpse. "Sleep tight," she murmured, relieving Mully of her ammo and walking towards the small town in the distance. Vinyl arrived in Hoofington just as the fight had started. A group of ponies had taken refuge behind one of the overturned train cars and were firing small arms over the top of the car. About 40 feet from where the ponies were taking cover, the buffalo had set up a barricade using barrels and water troughs. The buffalo were outnumbered, but far from outgunned. Each pony was armed with nothing more than a small pistol and the occasional rifle. The buffalo had Thompsons in general, though the occasional Springfield showed up. A stray bullet flew past her head, and she took cover with the ponies. "It's good to get some help round here," said the pony nearest to her. She was a light orange color, with a blonde mane and 3 red apples as a cutie mark. She was wearing a cowboy hat with 3 bullet holes in it. It looked like she had some close calls. "Name's Applejack," she said loudly over the gunfire. "I'm Vinyl," Vinyl said. "That's some fancy glove you got there," Applejack said, gesturing to the Fayed. "Yeah, a friend of mine gave it to me," Vinyl said, as if she hadn't just blown Mully's brains all over the desert floor without even flinching. A rifle shot whizzed past Vinyl's head, and she reached her hoof over the car and fired 3 shots.
"That's a mighty handy little gadget,"
Applejack said, watching Vinyl operate the Fayed.
"Most of the ponies here get hit when they're reaching their head over the train to fire."
Applejack jerked her head toward a makeshift first aid building.
"Applejack, I'm looking for some pony named Ruby Rhubarb,"
Vinyl said, blindly shooting a few more shots over the train car. She heard a loud whelp of pain and assumed she hit a buffalo.
"Ruby Rhubarb? You might be looking for my cousin Ruby,"
Applejack said, wincing as a flurry of gunfire pelted the train car.
"Might be,"
Vinyl asked.
"She's over in the first aid station, I reckon,"
Applejack replied. A pony to Vinyl's right yelped as a bullet blew off a chunk of her ear.
"Thanks, Applejack. Stay safe,"
Vinyl called out, making her way toward the first aid building. There were several nurses rushing around the building, stopping occasionally to wrap a wound or check on a patient. It looked like hell in the building. You couldn't look 5 feet without seeing blood. Vinyl winced when a loud scream rang out as a pony's leg was amputated and cauterized. Vinyl ignored the feeling in her stomach and continued to look for Ruby. It had been so long since she last saw her. Neither of them had even had a cutie mark yet. She scanned the room, looking for just a glimpse of her telltale spring green coat. And just out of the corner of her eye, she saw it. With a huff, she galloped over to Ruby.
"Ruby! Ruby!"
she called out, grabbing the pony's hoof.
Is that Vinyl I hear?"
Vinyl's eyes teared up. Ruby was in bad condition. She had a patch of gauze over one of her eyes, and there were deep wounds on her cheek. Her leg was severely bruised, and her ribs were wrapped up, presumably broken.
"Yes, Ruby, it's me,"
Vinyl said, choking on her tears.
"Vinyl, it's been so long since I've heard your voice."
Ruby smiled and reached up, stroking Vinyl's cheek. Vinyl began to sob uncontrollably.
"Vinyl, it's okay. I'll be fine,"
Ruby muttered, wiping away a tear from Vinyl's eye. Vinyl had no words to speak. She hadn't seen Ruby in so long, and now this is how she was going to see her?
What happened?"
Vinyl finally said.
"Those damn buffalo."
Ruby coughed.
"I was heading over to the nurse's office to check on a few of my friends who'd been bedridden for a while, and suddenly I heard a loud crash. I looked up and the train had been tipped, so I ran to go see if every pony was okay, and one of them buffalo rammed me right in the side. I slammed into one of the merchant shacks and it fell on me. The nurses say I've broken all my ribs and I'll be blind in one eye. But that's okay. We've got 2 for a reason."
Ruby giggled, but it turned into a rough cough. Vinyl looked on with worry, but Ruby wouldn't stop coughing. Vinyl called out for a nurse, but they were all busy.
"Ruby! Ruby!"
she said, trying to hold her still. Ruby began to hack up dark red blood, and her eye rolled back into her head.
"Ruby!"
Vinyl screeched, beginning to panic.
"Some pony! Help! Help!"
she yelled as a thin stream of blood slivered out of Ruby's open mouth.
"Ruby! Ruby! Don't leave! Ruby!"
Vinyl shrieked, wailing loudly. She sat for a minute, crying and hating the world. Ruby did not stir. Ruby did not breathe. Ruby was dead. And it was the fault of those damned buffalo.
"Those fuckers are gonna pay,"
Vinyl muttered, her melancholy replaced by burning rage. She leaned down and kissed Ruby.
"I'll avenge you, even if I have to give my own life. You will be avenged."
She gently closed Ruby's eyelid and grabbed a bone saw off a nearby medical table, strapping on her Fayed, heading outside into the war zone. The time for grieving was over. Now was time for vengeance. As Vinyl stepped outside into the raucous sound of gunfire, the constant yelling of commands and tactics greeted her. She took a breath and sprinted forward. She threw herself against the train car and held the bone saw in her mouth and the M1911 in her Fayed. She quickly peeked over the top of the car and was immediately fired at. The buffalo had the area held down pretty tight. She might be able to make her way around the pony's barricade and behind the buffalo, but it was too risky, and she'd draw attention too quickly. She spotted a familiar face and made her way over. She spit the bone saw out and waved Applejack down.
"Applejack, I've got a plan," Vinyl said loudly.
"And what kind of plan would that be?"
Applejack questioned, raising an eyebrow.
"I'm going to sneak around behind the buffalo and attack them from behind."
"Girlie, you are one crazy filly,"
Applejack said, silently judging Vinyl.
"but I trust you. What do you need if you're going to be getting around behind these buffalo?"
"I'm going to need a team of volunteers to distract them for long enough so I can get around without drawing attention," Vinyl said.
"I'll see what I can do,"
Applejack said, running off down the line of ponies. She returned several minutes later with a small troop of stallions.
"These fellers here say they ain't got a problem with distracting those big bad buffalo," she said. "Good. All you need to do is keep their eyes off me," Vinyl said, picking up the bone saw and sprinting off.
"Good luck,"
she heard Applejack call out.
"All right, fellas, let's give Vinyl the best distraction we can muster up."
"Yeah!"
Applejack shrieked, throwing herself over the train car in an all-out charge at the buffalo. Her troop followed after her, chanting, "For Hoofington! Ah!" Vinyl weaved her way in and out of the carnage surrounding the main battlefield. There were buildings on fire, corpses and plain-out mayhem everywhere. On occasion she'd see a patrolling buffalo, but she quickly dispatched them with a shot to the head or a bone saw swipe to the throat. By the time she reached her destination, her hooves were splattered with blood. "And I just showered," she thought. She flattened herself against the wall of a nearby building and peeked around the corner. The buffalo were too busy firing at Applejack and her troop of stallions that they hadn't realized Vinyl was sneaking up behind them.
"Hey, Ugly!"
she shouted. One of the buffalo turned around.
"Huh?"
"Boo!" Vinyl pulled the trigger on the M1911 and the buffalo fell to the floor. The gunshot alerted the other buffalo, and they all turned on Vinyl. Well, fuck, I guess that was a bit reckless, she mumbled.
"Yeah!"
Came a familiar shriek, and a few of the buffalo fell to the floor, bullets lodged in their skull.
"Get 'em, boys!"
Applejack shouted, and her small troop of stallions over the buffalo barricade, firing wildly. Vinyl grinned and waved to Applejack. Time to get to work. She emptied the clip of her M1911 into one of the nearest buffalo and tossed her gun to the floor. She used the Fayed to grab the bone saw out of her mouth and bury it into another buffalo's throat. Blood sprayed out of his jugular and hit Vinyl in the face. Her heart began to pump faster and faster. Her mind was filled with bliss, and she felt nothing but ecstasy. This was what she wanted. She tore the bone saw from the dead buffalo's throat and charged through the group of stallions, cutting the leg off of another buffalo. He fell to the floor, screaming.
"Oh, I'm sorry.
Let me soothe the pain!" Vinyl roared, sinking the jagged edge of the saw into the buffalo's skull. She pulled it out and turned to her left. A pair of buffalo armed with combat knives rushed toward her, letting out an obnoxious war cry.
"Hey!
Shut the fuck up!" she screamed, plunging her weapon into one of their stomachs. He gagged and spit up a flow of blood onto Vinyl's forehead. She held back a gag and kneed him in the groin. He fell to his knees and Vinyl withdrew the saw. She smirked and shoved the blade between his eyes. Vinyl slid the saw from his face and gripped the combat knife in her mouth. She used the two together to slice his eyes out of their sockets. She looked to the other one, who was staring in horror. You are fucking crazy!" he cried, attempting to get away. Vinyl thwarted his attempt by stuffing the combat knife into his ankle.
"Crazy? Crazy? If a filly is having a good time, she's crazy? I'll show you crazy!"
Vinyl howled, slicing open the back of the buffalo with the saw. She tore through all of his flesh and innards and gripped the spinal cord, ripping it from his skeleton quite violently.
"This is crazy!"
She turned the buffalo over and impaled him in the face with his own spine, laughing maniacally. Luckily for her and every pony else who was there, no pony saw this. She ripped the knife from his ankle and looked around. The battlefield was still full of buffalo.
"So much prey, so little time," she thought.
And then everything got blurry, and her hearing got muffled.
"What?"
Vinyl looked down, only to see a spear stab through her lower left rib.
"No,"
she mumbled, stumbling backwards as the spear was withdrawn. And down goes the champion, said a gruff voice. Vinyl's attacker stood over her as she lay on the ground, bleeding. He smirked and stomped on her face. The buffalo laughed and spit on her, walking away. She could faintly see the buffalo's face. He was missing an eye, and his leg was gone too. Vinyl stared up into the sky. It seemed to be an early afternoon. Her vision got really blurry. So this was how it was going to end. No. Vinyl climbed to her feet. The adrenaline pumping through her body numbed the pain. She wasn't going to die here. Not like this. She had to avenge Ruby. She couldn't fail her. Not now. The bone saw had been broken in two by the buffalo, so she grabbed the combat knife. The buffalo that had stabbed her was walking away. "No, you don't!" she screamed, sprinting towards him and jumping on his back. She growled and stabbed him in the neck several times, choking him simultaneously. He tried to scream, but all that came out was the gargle of blood filling his trachea. "Die, you son of a bitch!" Vinyl cried out as the buffalo dropped to the floor. She was flung off the buffalo and hit the floor hard. She couldn't move a muscle, and she felt like everything had been drained from her. Vinyl wasn't really sure if the puddle of blood she was lying in was hers or her victim's. Just as her eyes began to close, a familiar voice spoke up.
Vinyl, don't you die on me, shouted Applejack. I'm gonna get you to the first aid station, and you're gonna be alright. You hear me? You all gonna be alright, said Applejack, carefully hoisting Vinyl over her shoulder.
Just don't go to sleep on me now.
I wouldn't really much appreciate it if you died on my back.
Vinyl forced a smile and tried her best to keep awake.
Come on now, Vinyl, we're almost there. Hold yourself together, Sugar Cube,
Applejack said soothingly. Vinyl wished she wouldn't stop talking. Hearing her voice helped her so much. She began to drift off, and all she could mutter was, "Ruby." Applejack felt Vinyl turn into a dead weight on her back.
Damn, she's gone unconscious. It's only a matter of time till she's gone,
Applejack thought worriedly. They had arrived at the door to the first aid station, and a few nurses stood outside.
Here you go, Doc. She's got a pretty bad stab wound, so she'll be needing lots of rest,
Applejack said as she neared.
I'm so sorry, Applejack. We can't take any patients right now. We've got too much on our hands as it is.
Applejack scoffed in disbelief.
But this is a war zone! You can't just close down the hospital in a war zone,
she argued, beginning to get angry.
I'm sorry, Applejack, but we don't have enough staff to take care of any more patients. I'm truly, truly sorry,
the nurse said, frowning.
What good are y'all to all the pony folk out here if you can't help the ones who need helping?
Applejack said. She shook her head.
You know what? Forget it. I've someone who can take better care than any of you nurses,
Applejack said, running off. There was one person she could think of that could fix up anyone. Fluttershy. Applejack stopped about 10 feet from Hoofington. She couldn't abandon these ponies to fight for themselves. She couldn't let Hoofington fall. But she couldn't leave Vinyl to die either. She sighed, looking back at the war zone of a town. In the back of her mind, she knew that Hoofington was doomed. She knew that even if she did let Vinyl die and go back to help, she'd probably become a casualty of the bloody fight. Applejack looked to the unicorn on her back and bit her lip, galloping off into the desert. Vinyl felt like she weighed a ton, and she could hear fuzzy voices that seemed miles away. She opened her eyes and was lying on a cold stone floor. An eerie cold breeze ruffled her mane, and she stood up.
Hello?
She called out. Her voice echoed around her. She looked up to see if she could find out where she was, but there was nothing above her but a dark abyss. The cold breeze flew by again, and she suddenly felt very scared.
Vinyl,
a ghastly voice called out from behind her. She gasped and spun around quickly. Ruby Rhubarb stood before her, healthy as a horse.
Ruby, you're okay!
Vinyl shrieked happily. Ruby had a strange glowing aura about her that made Vinyl feel safe. Ruby giggled.
Come on, Vinyl,
she called, her voice sounding quite distant. Ruby turned and galloped around a corner. As Ruby disappeared, Vinyl felt extremely cold again.
Ruby, come back,
a tone of fear evident in her voice. She turned the same corner again and could barely make out the form of Ruby off in the distance. As her eyes adjusted more to the dark, she could see she was surrounded by identical stone surfaces save the roof.
"Come on, Vinyl,"
Ruby called out, giggling and trotting away. It was quite creepy, her giggle, and it gave Vinyl goosebumps all over.
"Ruby, where are you going?"
Vinyl said, following her. No matter how many corners she turned or how fast she ran, Ruby just seemed to get farther and farther.
"Ruby!"
She called out again, barely able to see the filly now, but Ruby kept on moving away. Ruby had vanished now, and Vinyl felt lost. She looked around and everything looked the same. Fear began to take over and Vinyl began to panic.
"Ruby! Ruby! Where are you? Ruby, I'm scared,"
she said, beginning to cry. Vinyl cried and cried and cried, but Ruby never showed up.
"Ruby, why did you leave me?"
she wailed. Suddenly the ground began to quake and the wall to her right crumbled, revealing the edge of a seemingly bottomless cliff. At 20 feet out from the cliff, Ruby was floating in the air, glowing brightly.
"Come to me, Vinyl,"
she said. Her voice calmed Vinyl to an extent, and she walked towards her, quickly reaching the edge of the cliff.
"Come to me, Vinyl,"
Ruby said again.
"But how, Ruby? I'll fall,"
Vinyl moaned, staring into the abyss below.
"No, Vinyl, I'm here for you. It's safe,"
Ruby said, smiling warmly. The more Vinyl looked at Ruby, the better she felt about the whole situation. She took a deep breath and stepped off the cliff, awaiting a frightening fall to her doom. She looked down and could see Ponyville at the bottom of the cliff, in all its colorful glory.
"Ruby, look! I'm okay!"
she cheered, looking up at Ruby. Or at least what once was Ruby. Now, in the exact spot Ruby had been floating, sat a gruesome rendition of Ruby. Her face was mutilated and she was barely recognizable. In fact, the only thing that wasn't torn up was her snout and mouth. Her chest was split open, revealing her dead organs. Her legs had all been replaced by bloody bones with small bits of flesh hanging off. Vinyl began to shiver as she felt very cold again.
"Ruby,"
she said meekly. The grotesque figure opened its mouth wide. "Vinyl scratch," it wailed. The very sound of the voice clawed at Vinyl's mentality. Vinyl didn't feel safe floating above the cliff anymore, and her heart began to beat faster than ever before.
"Ruby!"
she cried out, hoping for the figure to turn back to her beloved. She looked back down Ponyville, which was now completely destroyed, with various corpses lying around, and fires raging all over. Vinyl screamed, and began to fall to her doom. Tears flooded her eyes as she screamed. Her heart was beating faster, 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 and then it slowed. She felt like she was floating, and her ears felt clogged. Vinyl felt her heart slow quickly, almost to a stop, and she found herself choking for breath. It felt like she was being held underwater. She opened her eyes, and found herself indeed underwater. Above her, the ghastly Ruby was holding her down by the throat, cackling evilly. Her vision began to go dark as water flooded her lungs, and her heart stopped. Her vision began to get darker, and darker, and darker, and then it was all black. Then there was a scream. Vinyl was screaming. Her eyes shot open, and she found herself sitting in a strange house. Standing above her was the most beautiful pony she had ever seen, and her heart began to beat faster when she realized their lips were touching. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this latest entry. I certainly did. This chapter has such an awesome mix of action and horror. I think I got a little enthusiastic there. I really think my Vinyl voice is getting worse and worse, but until she starts speaking on the show, I doubt anyone considers it a huge deal. At least I hope not. Also, once again, I don't know when the next chapter will be, so just keep an eye open And once again, I thank my subscribers, including the few most recent ones, for doing just that. So, until next time, comments are and always will be welcome. And thanks again for listening, every pony. See you soon.